Welcome to All Books Aloud with Elizabeth
and Martha, two sisters who love reading in all of its forms.
I'm Elizabeth, an academic librarian by day and fiction writer by night with a lifelong obsession with all things reading and books.
And I'm Martha, a busy real estate agent who came to my love of reading later, but now I'm an audiobook power user. We chat about the books we're reading and delve a little deeper into a topic related to reading or publishing.
If you love reading, nerding out about books, and sassy millennial hot takes, this podcast is the place for you.
Hey, Liz.
Hi, Martha. How are you?
I am great. I'm very excited today because we're going to record one of my favorite annual episodes. We're recapping our year of reading.
Yes, I'm excited too.
We're not going to talk about the books we're reading right now because we're talking about so many books. And all of that will be in the show notes. So if there's a book we talked about and you couldn't keep up or write it down fast enough, we'll include everything in the show notes.
Yes, for sure.
So are you happy or unhappy with your year of reading this year, Liz, in 2025?
Well, unfortunately, this is a new year, but same me. One of my neuroses is that I am constitutionally incapable of being satisfied or happy with how I spend my time, which longtime listeners to the podcast will know in the episodes where we've talked about how you spend your leisure time, and the last yearly recap episode we did where we talked about reading goals and stuff. I always look back at a year or 5 years or whatever the period of time is and think that I could have done more in whatever it is that I'm thinking about, whether it's reading or writing or hiking or literally anything. I don't know what's wrong with me. And that's not for us to solve today. But it's kind of a mixed bag for me, honestly. I feel good that I met the goal that I set for myself. But even in that, I consciously set a goal that was realistic. And so there's still a little part of my brain that's saying that I didn't read enough. But I have really been reflecting on my reading overall, my reading life in the past couple of weeks, because I've decided that I'm switching to Storygraph this year, which is kind of huge for me. I know you did it a couple years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have been using Goodreads since 2007. I realized when I decided to make this switch, I went back and looked at the first book that I recorded reading on Goodreads, and it was 2007. So this is a big deal for me because I basically have been using Goodreads for 20 years.
Yeah, and I never used Goodreads, so it was a very easy thing for me to do, to just start using Storygraph.
Yeah, I've been using Goodreads for a really long time, which is part of the reason why it was hard for me to decide to make this change. But I have been wanting to make this change for a while because, for those who don't know, Goodreads is owned by Amazon, which, whatever, you can decide to care about that or not care about that as you please. But I do care about it, and I try not to give Amazon money if I can at all help it. And also, Goodreads as a platform, they basically haven't made any updates to it in like a decade, and they've been open about the fact that they're not planning to. And when I looked up online the pros and cons of Goodreads versus Storygraph, one of the main pros for Goodreads was what people called the community, like the elements that they have for you to have friends and to share reviews and talk to each other and stuff. That's not a pro for me. I want fewer random people talking to me about the books that I read, not more.
And on Storygraph, you can have friends, but it's your real friends. You can share your account info with actual people you know, and they can follow you.
Oh,
so
good.
It's not just randoms commenting on your reviews and things like that.
Okay, so cool. That's great. Good. I'm glad to know that. But anyway, regardless of that, I basically was like, I don't care about this. And Storygraph, I don't remember if we talked about this when you were switching, but it's an independent business. It's not owned by a big corporation. It's owned by a Black woman, which
I don't think we did.
I didn't know that until I started looking at the pros and cons, Goodreads versus Storygraph. So I'm happy about supporting that. But I didn't just want to abandon 20 years worth of reading on Goodreads. And so I figured out how you could automatically import your Goodreads library into Storygraph. And so I did that for my books that I've read, but I decided that I didn't want to do that for my TBR. So I decided to actually go through and look at all the books on my TBR and decide whether I'm still actually interested in reading them. And so I'm not done yet. I think I'm up to 2016.
Oh my goodness.
There's so many books on your TBR, you're never going to read all of them. And so that's why I decided to do this. It basically is meaningless if it's just 1,000 books that I'm never going to actually get to, that I'm never going to look at or think about again, which is what it sort of had become on Goodreads. And so I've been meticulously going through and looking at the books, which has been very time consuming. And so I'll probably have feelings about how much time I spent on doing it. But it's been really interesting to meet my former selves, the different versions of me that I've been in the past, and my former interests and my former obsessions. I'm going by year, starting the earliest. So it's clear that I'll have periods where I go through being really interested in one topic and I add a bunch of books about it that I never actually intended to read or got to reading. And then with a lot of the books, I'll look at it now and be like, I have no idea why I wanted to read this book at all.
Yeah.
I can't even conceive of what about this would have interested me. And then, of course, as we've talked about many times on this podcast, my reading has also changed, especially in the last few years. But obviously, as I look at this list, it's changed various times since 2007. So anyway, that was a very long and meandering answer to your question about how I feel about my reading year. But it's been a really interesting exercise to reflect on my reading self and the different versions of me that have existed in the past, and letting go of some of what almost feels like baggage, that TBR that's just like thousands and thousands of books, more books than I could ever read in a lifetime.
Yeah. A lot of people at the start of the year have the urge to declutter their houses and go through all their stuff. And so it goes right along with that. And it's funny that you were talking about your TBR, because I have a TBR on Storygraph, but I hardly ever revisit it. And it's not as far back as yours because I've only been using it for a couple years. And I've noticed doing these year-end recap videos that even some of the books I talked about at the beginning of 2025, I never read. So unless you are intentionally using your TBR as a tool, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to just never revisit those books again.
That's a great point.
I thought of it as, oh, these are books that I would like to read, but it wasn't necessarily part of my goal.
No, sure. They're books that I'm interested in. Whether I'm actually going to read them or not is up for debate.
Right. Which is also the beauty of a TBR. Most of them are never ending, and yeah, it's not like a hard and fast rule.
No, certainly not. And there's obviously nothing wrong with having a TBR that's 10,000 books long. But I do think that it's what you said is spot on. It feels like decluttering to me, and it feels cathartic in that way that decluttering can be.
Yeah.
You know?
Or like you said, just looking at the different eras of your life. And if you're someone who had a bunch of self-development or breakup books or something, and then 5 years have gone by and you're like, oh, I'm glad I'm past that part of my life.
And like, I don't need to read those books.
Yeah.
They don't need to be on my TBR anymore. Like,
exactly.
I'm okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And I'm excited for you to use Storygraph. I think you'll really like it once you start seeing some of those stats stack up, because I don't think that Goodreads has the same kind of data, which is really fun.
No, it doesn't. And I already imported my books that I have read. And so I got to look at some of the statistics for those. It categorized them based on mood and pace and stuff like that. And it was really interesting. I was like, oh, this is cool. I like having these statistics. Yeah. So what about you? Are you happy or unhappy with your year of reading?
I'm very happy with my year of reading. I think I read more books in 2025 than I ever have, which isn't really what it's all about. And I didn't do it intentionally, but I read very broadly, a lot of different genres, books that were published years ago, some new releases, some that I reread. and some that are totally new to me, new authors. And really, I think that it's because I don't give myself limits on what I'm reading. So in a way, that helps you read more broadly because my reading goal is always attainable. So I don't stress about it, and it just gives me more freedom to read what I want and what I'm interested in.
That's good. I am happy that you are able to feel that way. It also makes me laugh because I feel like it's so obvious and probably obvious to some listeners that I am an oldest daughter and you are a youngest daughter.
Yes. Yes. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am a rule follower and I know that. So if I set rules for myself, I can get into the weeds. And that's why the older I get, the more I'm like, no, there's no rules, but you're not wrong. So 2025 will always be the year of Robin Hobb for me.
Oh.
It was the year of Robin Hobb, which was not on my TBR. It wasn't on my radar at all in the beginning of the year. So for those of you who don't know, Robin Hobb is the pen name of an American fantasy author named Margaret Astrid Lindholm Ogden. It's quite the mouthful. But she has published other genres outside of fantasy, and I think she uses her given name for those books. But in the fantasy world, she's Robin Hobb. And she's known for multiple series of books referred to as the realm of Elderling's Saga, which includes 5 trilogies, except for the Rainwild Chronicles, which has 4 books. And I've talked about these books on the podcast before, and I read all of them this year. So how many books is that? About 16 books?
Yeah. Wow.
They had me in a complete chokehold. They have everything I love: world building, deep character development, great plot lines, excellent writing, dragons, unique magic system. And as a bonus, she used to live in Alaska. She used to live in Fairbanks. And her map for her Elderling's realm is actually an upside down map of Alaska, which is kind of a fun fact.
Oh, that is really fun. I love
Yeah.
that.
And she used to live in the Pacific Northwest as well, so she draws a lot of inspiration from that. And in 2021, she was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award at the World Fantasy Convention in Montreal, Canada. And she posted on her website just what an honor it was and how she never expected that to happen. And I thought it was really cool. It's a world that I hope to revisit many times throughout my life, and it was just fantastic. So that really underscored my whole year.
So wait, I knew that you were reading Robin Hobb, but I didn't realize you read 16 of her books. That is amazing.
Yeah.
And it also makes you very well positioned to be able to tell me if I wanted to read one of her books, or anyone, any of our listeners.
Yeah.
Where should we start if we wanted to enter the world of Robin Hobb?
Well, it depends on what you're into. So for you, Liz, because you're such a character-driven reader, I would say to start with the Farseer trilogy, because you're going to be introduced to Fitz. Fitz is her most fleshed out character who's in most of the books, and people love Fitz. He's just such a lovable character. He's so introspective, and he grows so much throughout the whole saga that I think that's where you would start. And then if you're someone like me who's into story and world building and dragons, I started with the Rainwild Chronicles, and that series is heavy in dragons and learning the history about them and their dragon keepers, the people who work with them, and the magic. And then there's also a trilogy called Live Ship Traders, which is part of this world, but they're pirates who are traders on live ships, which are magical ships. And that ties into the dragons. It's just this huge world. So if you're a fantasy person, I would say start with Rainwild Chronicles or Live Ship Traders. And if you're a character person, the Farseer trilogy.
Okay. And the first Farseer trilogy is called Assassin's Apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
And the first Rainwild Chronicles is called The Dragon Keeper, just if people are looking for titles. When you were talking about the dragon one, too, if you were really into Rebecca Yaros's books or any of those other romantasy books that have come out in the last couple of years that are about dragons, it sounds like this would probably be a good read for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a good segue into more of just a fantasy genre. There are romantic interests in it, and there's a lot of drama about relationships, which I thought were so well done and way more complicated than some of the romantasy tropes that you'll see. You still get a little of that relationship element to it, but it's not explicit.
Right.
Yeah, I just can't recommend them enough.
That's awesome. I'm going to read one of these this year.
So let's talk more about our goals. What was your goal for 2025, Liz?
Oh, yeah, I leapfrogged a little bit and already spoiled that I met my goal. I set the goal for myself of 38 books, print and audio, and I met it. I didn't meet it, though, until the very end of the year. So it's not like I set a really easy goal. I didn't actually read the 38th book until I was in Hawaii at the end of the year. And so it was a good goal for me. I'm itching to set my goal higher because I feel like I can do more. I reached the goal. That means I can do more. But we can talk about that when we get to it. What about you? Did you reach your goals?
Yes. So I did set a goal, and as I alluded to, I always make it very attainable. I did reach it, and it's always the same every year. It is one physical book a month and as many audiobooks as I can or want to listen to. I say that's really how I read all my books. It's about 60-40. I've learned from Storygraph, 60% audio and 40% print. At least that's what I did in 2025. So that just is so attainable for me because I'm in a book club. So I always read at least one book a month. I force myself to, no matter what, because I want to go to the book club. And I can always go if I haven't read the book, but it's just more interesting to me if I have. So one physical book a month. And if I have more time, I will read more. And then as many audiobooks as I can. This year, similar to you, trying not to use Goodreads, I really want to get away from using Audible, but it's very hard because in my experience trying to use Libby and similar apps like that, I don't want to wait 8 weeks for the book I want to read right now. Yeah. Because my library only has so many copies and there's so many other people who have them on hold. So that is hard for me, but I think that if I can release the part of my goal that's as many audiobooks as possible, then it's okay to wait for a book. I can listen to a podcast. I can do one of my other hobbies. I don't have to just consume as many books as possible. So I'm going to try, once I use my credits I have, to transition away from Audible.
I know. This is the same thing, like what I said at the beginning about trying not to give Amazon money if possible. Just to be clear, in case anyone was feeling like that was me being up on my moral high horse, I do buy things from Amazon. Amazon comes to our house. They have created a world. We have allowed them to create a world where it's almost impossible to avoid that. And I feel like it's with the audiobooks too. Amazon's business model has made it almost impossible for people to compete with them. And so it's like they're the only game in town. And so if you want to get away from that, you're sacrificing. So I totally get that. You shared with me a couple of days ago that reel that Ann Patchett did about Arundhati Roy's books, which I now also want to add to my TBR. We'll get to that. But she talked about something called Libro FM.
Yeah, Libro FM is connected to local bookstores, I think. I haven't really looked into it yet. I think it's similar in that you can buy credits, but the proceeds go to local bookstores. I think it's a little more expensive, but it's worth it. If I could support Fireside through Libro FM, I would love to do that.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. I just wasn't sure what it is. You know, the other thing that I use is Spotify has audiobooks now, which is also a big corporation that doesn't pay artists enough. But if you are trying to just wean yourself off of Audible, it might, I don't know. It's a question of whether it's a lesser evil. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Spotify I've tried and I have a gripe with too, because the volume of books that I listen to in my premium account, there's a certain amount that's included. And then once you reach that, you have to pay more, which I refuse to do. So then I'll be like 3/4 through a book, and then I'll have to wait till the next month to finish it.
Yeah. Well, no judgment. If you decide that you can't stop using Audible completely, I feel like there's also something to be said for maybe you just cut down while you're exploring these other options and seeing if they'll work for you. That also would be fine. We're all just doing our best here.
Yeah. And part of it that I'm going to be paying attention to is which platforms are allowing AI narrators, because I don't want to support that. So that's another element that is going to be more and more important in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So did you do anything different this year? We touched on this a little bit, but let's go back to it.
Well, there were a few shifts in my reading this year that I noticed looking back at it. I don't think I would have noticed otherwise, which is part of why I like doing this, is looking back, even though it gives me mixed feelings. I definitely noticed some changes that were obviously organic because they were intentional goals that I had or anything, but I've started to find that I'm sometimes being drawn to literary novels again. So you might remember, if you've been listening to us for a while, that I had basically what I would describe as an extreme course correction during the pandemic, where I would say that literary novels were the main thing that I read, that and classics. Even after I went to library school, where I released a lot of my snobbishness about genre fiction, for whatever reason, literary fiction was my genre. That's the main genre that I was drawn to when there were no other factors at play.
Mm-hmm.
And during the pandemic, I just stopped being able to engage with anything that was at all depressing, sad, morally questionable. I needed to escape reality. And so I basically started reading only romance novels and cozy mysteries, basically. Like, I just wouldn't read anything else. And I was fine with that. I was happy with what I was reading. But I found this year that I started hearing about literary books, or finding out about them as I do in the library, and thinking, oh, that's interesting. I want to read that. And so that is something that I did more of this year. I actually have quite a few literary books on my list of books that I read. And then related to that is that I have started to want to read classics again as well, that I never read for whatever reason. And that's also something that I just had lost the taste for. I always used to love reading classics, and other than Jane Austen, basically, which is a perennial favorite for me, and that will never change. I basically just stopped being interested in going back and reading classics, but that also has shifted this year and maybe a little bit last year. I talked a little bit about reading The Woman in White. I also read Brideshead Revisited. I listened to both of them. After I tried to read the print version of Woman in White, but it's like 600 pages and it had Bible pages, and I was...
I love that description of Bible pages because it's so tangible.
Yeah, it's just so specific though, right? If you ever had to read the Bible or have a Bible, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I just couldn't do it in print. But I found that I really love listening to classics on audio, and it makes it a lot easier for me to read them because, as we've talked about a lot of times, our reading sensibilities have just really changed since like the mid 20th century. I'm sure that it's changed since then as well, but there is a real visible difference between a Victorian novel and what we read today. And it just makes it really difficult, even for someone who reads a lot. The writing is different. The pace of the story is different. The amount of description, it makes it difficult to read in print. But in audio, I found that it's a lot easier to get through. And also, there are a lot of more recent productions of classic novels that have been done. A new version of Sense and Sensibility, for instance, which I listened to this year, read by Rosamund Pike, who is Jane in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. It was wonderful. And they do these full productions. Sometimes they have multiple actors. And so that is going to be my strategy going into this year for reading more classics that I've always wanted to read but haven't gotten to for various reasons.
Yeah, I love that.
What about you? Did you do anything different this year?
As you were talking, I realized that my tastes kind of shifted this year as well. I mainly used to read fantasy and romance and romantasy, and this year I still read a lot of romance, but there was a certain point in the year where I don't know if I burned myself out, but I was just craving something different. So I did turn more to sci-fi and historical fiction and just straight up fantasy. I can't really point to why. I don't know if it's a season of life or just, like I said, burning out or just getting bored with the tropes. For whatever reason, that kind of shifted a little this year as well, which doesn't really mean anything, but it's kind of interesting to note about yourself.
Yeah.
And I also started a new book club with a group of friends, and it was inspired by a reel I saw on social media. The idea is an audiobook club where a group of people come together and listen together and simultaneously craft. So you're keeping yourself busy while you're listening to the audiobook with your friends. So you have a fun shared experience. And we started it as a brunch where everyone brings a dish and we chat and have food and talk and catch up. And then we'll start listening to the book and crafting. And then in between book club sessions, we all listen to the same point and then we meet again so that way we can get through the book a little quicker. That's been really fun. But what we're finding is that we're having so much fun visiting. It's hard to get through any of the book together, but that's okay. That's just more connection and community, and it's been great.
Yeah. I love that so much. I always wish that we lived closer together. But when you told me you were doing that, I was like, oh my God, I want to come to that so bad.
Yeah, it's been so fun. And people just come and go. We can't all make every meeting, but it's just very open and just pop in and when you can and pop out when you can't and come back when you can. And it's great. The other trendy thing that we both tried this year was an Advent book.
Yes, that's right. The Advent book.
So you may have seen these Advent books advertised online. We're not going to say which book we chose because neither of us liked it. My opinion is that it is kind of a gimmicky thing because most of the ones we looked at, the authors hadn't had other books published before. They weren't established authors, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? But the book that we read, we didn't like. We thought the writing was bad and it was a slog to get through. But both of us were just like, well, we're doing it, so let's finish it and see what happens. Yeah. My hot take is make your own Advent book. There didn't really seem to be a reason why the chapters were grouped the way they were. So if it's a book you haven't read, you could just group it into chapters, divide the book into 24 or 12, whatever you want to do, and make your own. It would also be a great thing to gift if you made someone an Advent book and gifted it. Maybe it's a book that you know they want to read or they love or they want to revisit, and then group the chapters in a curated, thoughtful way.
Yeah, that's a cute idea.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a romance. A lot of them were holiday romances. And the other thing I found about myself is that's just not my thing. Every holiday romance I've ever tried to start, I've not finished. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I've tried a few.
I haven't tried any other holiday romances. So obviously they're not my thing either because I've never even wanted to read one. I say that I love a holiday romance movie. Mm-hmm. Like, give me a Hot Frosty any day.
It's more visual.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I didn't like the book. And we chose a book and a writer that actually was established. And the book had been published as a non-Advent book before. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we explained what physically made it an Advent book. It's a book between two covers. And then it has these little cardstocky inserts between the chapters that fold over. And ours, they were pink and white and had little holiday graphics on them. Mm-hmm. And they fold. They're thicker than the pages, but they separate out the book. So when you look at the book, it looks like it just has basically 12 little mm-hmm. sections. And you're supposed to only read one section per day or per 2 days. And so that's what makes it Advent. It doesn't have anything to do with the story of Christmas. It's just that it's portioned out in that way, the way that you open a chocolate every day for that type of a,
Yeah.
for the heathen version of advent calendars where you just like get a little treat every day.
Mhm.
If you wanted to make your own, basically that's what it would entail, is just folding over some type of cute little cardstock paper that you separate the book into. But yeah, I didn't love it.
No.
It was cute to try. And the element of it that I liked is that it basically was like being in a book club with you.
Mhm.
Because we were reading the same book and we were reading it at the same pace. And so we could talk about it until you went rogue and finished it early.
I couldn't, at the end, I just couldn't take it. I was like, I have other books I want to start. I just want to know what happens and be done with this book. So I read like the last 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. I also don't love that both of us would have DNF'd it if it weren't for the Advent factor. As you know, I'm an advocate of stopping a book when you don't like it. And so if it's going to make you feel like you have to keep reading even though you don't like it, then maybe it's not that great of an idea.
Yeah, we tried it. And I'm sure there's people out there who love it and think it's great.
Yeah. Okay, Martha, it's the question that everyone wants to know. What was your favorite book of the year?
Oh, this is the question I don't think I can answer, but I will. So I think, as you could already tell, my experience with all of the Robin Hobb books were probably the highlight of my year, but I can't say that 16 books were my favorite. And I also can't just pick one. So make of that what you want. But there are 2 books I want to talk about because they also stood out to me. The first one that I want to say is one of my favorites is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. That book, I know Liz has talked about it on the podcast before.
God, I love that book.
It was so good. For those of you who don't know, it's a historical fiction based on the story of Shakespeare and his wife. And it follows the story of their family from the perspective of his wife, but also kind of goes back and forth.
I would say it's the story of Shakespeare's wife, Agnes.
Yeah.
Because Shakespeare's in it, but he's like a side character.
And they never name him as
They
Shakespeare.
never name him.
They only refer to him as her husband or his father's son. They never say his name, which I thought was really cool because the point is not to focus on the fact that it's Shakespeare. You want to focus on Agnes and her story and her perspective.
Yeah.
It did go back and forth in time, which I thought was really well done too, of like how they met and their story of how they fell in love and then their marriage and what happened and their son Hamnet, who the book is named after.
Yeah. I listened to an interview with Maggie O'Farrell talking about the book. And so that's the only reason I know that the project that she had in mind when she wrote the book was very intentionally to de-center Shakespeare from this narrative. Because there's very little that we actually know about his wife. We know that she existed. We know her name. We know some very basic facts about her life. But putting that aside, Maggie O'Farrell talked about how it grated on her the way that his wife was talked about in scholarship, mainly. She was sort of talked about like this burden for Shakespeare, that he had to keep going back and forth. He had to keep sending money back to this wife who was holding him back from being his full genius. Is sort of the tone of a lot of what's written about Shakespeare's family. And she just, as a mother and as a wife, she was like, this just doesn't sit well with me. I feel like there probably was a lot more to this story. And so that was her intention when she started writing it.
Yeah. And that was so completely and well done because I didn't read any of that beforehand. And I totally got that sense just by the way she didn't use his name. She was trying to decenter him from the story. Beautiful writing, great story, tragic. I mean, just hit you in all the feels. And I read it because I wanted to watch the movie because I heard it was so good. But of course, I want to read the book first. And I'm so glad I did. I haven't seen the movie yet. I know you did. What did you think?
Yeah, I did see the movie. The movie is good. It's a good movie. It is similarly a gut punch. I would say, of course, the book is always better. Obviously, no one's going to be surprised by me saying that. The way that the book is better is that it's the movie is just the tragic, sad parts, basically. That's not entirely true. They try to give you a sense of the family during happy times, but it's just that a movie is short and you can only do so much. And they really focused on the sad parts. It's very sad from beginning to end. Whereas the book, I don't know if you felt that way. I didn't feel that way about the book. I thought that it was sad in places, but it's more the way that literary fiction, it's like about life. And life isn't all happy or all sad or tied up in a neat little bow. It is the story of this woman's life, and there's good and there's bad and there's tragedy, and she gets over it and she goes on because you have to. And there's beauty, and it's much richer than the movie is capable of.
Yeah, you feel all the emotions, like you said. There's joy, there's fear, there's sadness, anger. It is the story of a life, which is what is great about literary fiction, but definitely not always a feel good. I listened to an interview with Jessie Buckley, who's the actress that plays Agnes in the movie. And I won't spoil anything, but there was a scene and a part of the book that's very intense and sad and tragic. And she said that there was a moment where she just let out this primal scream, and that was not scripted. That is just what she felt playing this role, which just underlines everything that we've been saying. If you have any interest in literary fiction, historical fiction, fictionalized biographies, feminist retellings, definitely check out Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And then my second book, I can't just pick one book, so I'm going to say The Witchway Tree by Elizabeth Crook. It's a modern Western. It's the story of two kids who go on an epic quest, essentially, to avenge their mother and stepmother's death. They're searching for a panther. So it's like a totally different take on a Western, and written by a woman, which is also rare. And it's an epistolary novel. It's all told through letters where the main character is writing to a judge to give him testimony about all of these events that occurred. And it really just surprised and delighted me. And that doesn't happen very often. So it really just stuck with me. And I love that book.
I remember you talking about this, and in fact, you asked me to try to help you find books that you could read that would give you a similar feeling, and I really want to read it now, but I don't remember if I ever added it to my TBR, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah, you better do it. It was good, and you recommended a few, and I found that there is a follow-up to the book called The Mad Stone, where it kind of continues to follow the story of the main character, so that's on my TBR. So what about you, Liz? What was your favorite book this year, or books?
Yeah, I know I complained to you yesterday that I was having a hard time choosing. I decided that I was going to try to choose a favorite print book and a favorite audiobook, but I even then am having a hard time choosing. For audio, I think that I'm comfortable saying that my favorite audiobook I listened to is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, read by Meryl Streep. It just enveloped me. I think actually this is when I realized that I was turning back toward literary fiction because I read it in the spring, and it just had been such a long time since I was so fully immersed in a world that I felt like when I would stop reading it, I had to blink and remember where I was when I would turn it off. You know, I just loved it so much. So I'm going to say that for audio. And it's a contender for the favorite book overall, but I'm not going to try to do that because I have been fretting about that for days and days. For print books, I think maybe one of the reason I'm having a hard time is because I've read more different genres this year than the past couple of years. The past couple of years, like I said, it was all romance and mystery. And so it was like, obviously my favorite book is a romance. This year, I have a favorite romance, which was A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin, which I read in print and I absolutely loved and would recommend to anyone. It was great. My other favorite print book, which is historical fiction, not literary fiction, but I feel like there's a lot of overlap there. It's literary fiction set in the past, is The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. And I'm not 100% sure I'm pronouncing that right, but that's how Elizabeth Day pronounced it on her podcast when she had this author on. So I'm going with that. It is a really beautiful book. It's about so many things, but it's basically about two people who fall in love when they're young and then are separated and then find each other again. But it's against the larger backdrop of the Cypriot War, which I didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
But that just displays my ignorance because, of course, when I talked to Al about it, he knew all about it. But basically, the island of Cyprus is split between Turkey and Greece. And there was a lot of violence and conflict to get to that point. And so it's set with that as the backdrop. And it is heartbreaking and beautiful and all the things that we were just talking about with Hamnet. And so I would say that that is the print book that had the biggest effect on me. But A Lady's Guide to Scandal was the best romance. I just loved it so much. So I feel like I can choose between those two for print.
I don't know if we'll ever just have one favorite book a year. I don't think either of us have it in us to choose a favorite child.
Yes, definitely. So we didn't do this in our previous yearly recap episodes, but I thought it would be fun to talk about some of the big issues or stories in books and reading in general that have come up in the past year. And for me, a big first thing that comes up is AI in books. You already talked about it a little bit when you were talking about AI narrators, which we talked about when we were interviewing Laura Horowitz. But there's also so many other issues of AI in books that have come up this year.
Yeah, even so far as AI created books, which people are trying to sell in bookstores, which came up in our interview with Rebecca, who is a bookseller. And you and I were both kind of like, people are doing that. They're taking AI created books to local indie bookstores and trying to get them on the shelves. And she was like, oh, yeah. And they have a policy in place that they will not sell AI created books.
Yeah. And it also came up when we did our interview. I can't remember what season it was in now, but we did our interview with the translator, Polly McIntosh, who worked for Gallic Books and translated Clara Reed's Proust from French to English. She was talking about how they were starting to see people trying to use AI to do translation work. And that has just continued and gotten more and more. But I always think back to our interview with her when I read these stories about publishers using it, because we talked with her about how much of an art translating is. It's not just putting it into Google Translate. It's not just an A plus B equals C. There is an art to it, to making sure that the words you're choosing and the idioms that you're choosing are capturing the same meaning and the same mood and the same atmosphere as the original work.
Anyone who's used Google Translator when you're traveling knows that, yeah, you can communicate on a basic level and get your point across, but it's not a perfect translation to the true meaning because Google Translate doesn't have context.
Yeah, far from perfect. And of course, I'm sure the people using it would claim that the AI tool that they have is much more advanced than Google Translate, but
whatever.
I don't. Yeah. We're obviously both AI skeptics at this point. The other thing that came up a lot this year with AI in the book world is all the lawsuits that have been filed by authors whose books were used to train the big generative AI tools like ChatGPT without their consent or their knowledge. One of which OpenAI lost, and they are having to pay a settlement. I actually went and checked to see if any of my books were used, but they weren't, so I don't get any of the settlement. My scholarly books.
That's good. One of the last books I listened to at the very end of the book, before the credits, it had a disclaimer that said, I do not consent to my work being used to train AI. So I think we'll be seeing more of that disclosure in the future. Maybe you need to add it to your books, Liz.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that I would say has happened over the course of the year. I feel like we began the year having a lot of conversations, not just you and I, but including you and I, but also all the people in the different realms of my life who talk about this, which there's been a ton of discussion about AI in academia and also a ton of discussion about AI in the writing circles that I'm a part of, the publishing circles and podcasts that I listen to and all that. And I feel like we started the year with, this is bad. These are the ways that it's bad. This is what's happening, right? And we've gotten to the point by the end of this year where people are starting to push back against it in various ways. Like you said, authors are putting at the end of their book that they don't want their books to be used to train AI. Agents and publishers are starting to have AI clauses in their contracts about whether the author used AI to write any of the book, or saying that they're not allowed to use AI to write anything if they want to be represented by the agent. All of the agents that I queried this year had some form of checkbox, or you had to affirm that you did not use AI to create any of your novel or any of this query package. So it seems pretty universal in a lot of these spaces that people don't want AI in books, except, of course, at the very top. So there are publishers who are still trying to use AI to do various things because, of course, it's always about money. And if they can get AI to do it instead of paying a person, then obviously that's what they're going to do because, of course, publishing is a huge business.
Well, and that's the caveat, right? They want to be able to use AI. They don't want their authors, who they're paying good money, to be able to use AI because they want to be able to have the distinction that this is written by a human. But when we want to use AI, we can use AI.
Yes, you're right about that. And also, it's controversial at this point to be in a writing space, either online or in person, and say that you use AI to write. There certainly are people that disagree with that, but I would say that it's much less than it was a couple of years ago when there were a lot of debates in writing circles and publishing circles about whether AI is good for certain groups of people and they should be allowed to use it. It seems like it has moved pretty strongly towards the end of the spectrum that is saying we need to stand against this because it's threatening to take away creativity, basically.
Right.
It's making it so that people who are creators and artists are not going to be able to continue creating their art, and that we need to be against that. That's bad. We don't want that.
Yeah, and not only that, but the quality is so poor right now, and that might change in the future. There are specifically children's books for sale that you can get on Amazon that are AI created and that aren't necessarily obviously created by AI when you buy it. But then these parents have received the book, whether it's sent to them from by a grandparent or whatever, and they start reading the book to their kid and they're like, this is a horrible book. Either it doesn't have a coherent plot or it's teaching them misinformation, whatever the case may be. That's just dangerous to our culture, the future of our society, if this is what we're raising children on. So definitely be aware if you're purchasing any book. If it is written or illustrated using generative AI, it should be disclosed. And if it's not, hopefully it's still obvious and you can spot it before you buy.
Even if it is obvious, though, you have to be looking for it. You have to be critically considering the things that you're buying, which is difficult. I don't blame people for not having the time or the mental bandwidth to want to do that for everything. But yeah, if it's something that you want to avoid, you have to just look more closely at what you're buying.
And hopefully at some point, policies will be in place to protect us from it, but we don't know yet if that's the direction that we're going. But as we've talked about before, at least in the publishing industry, we do have some power to vote with our dollar. So if that's something that's important to you, make sure you're supporting real authors, real illustrators, real translators, real narrators, human people.
Yes. Human people.
So besides AI, which we could go on and on about between the two of us, what other issues around books have you noticed this last year, Liz?
I feel like there was a lot of discourse around what people read on social media specifically. And maybe that wasn't an only this year thing, but it definitely happened this year in various ways. And of course, part of this is because of my algorithm. I'm interested in books and reading, and so I get a lot of content on TikTok and Instagram of people that are talking about books. There's a lot of discourse about romantasy. That's continuing to be something that is very heavily talked about and debated, and a lot of people have opinions. But this year, I saw more pushback against the pushback, if that makes sense. When we did our episode where we were talking about romantasy and what it is and what makes it unique as a genre, and we read that New York Times article about how basically they were saying that it's just because women are lonely or something that they're reading romantasy. I feel like we've come from that to, I have seen a really strong pushback against that on social media of women making a full-throated defense of why all of that is bullshit. And A, we should be allowed to read what we want to read, but also here are all the reasons why what you're saying is ridiculous. Anywhere from the women who read this are really smart and maybe they just need to escape from reality, right? Those two things are not related. Your intelligence and what you choose to read for pleasure are not connected, to a defense of women being allowed to have a sexual life. Because there's a lot of pushback about romantasy being like porn for women and stuff like that, as if that is something that women should be ashamed of. So I don't know. I was happy to see a lot of pushback against some of these narratives that have come up since romantasy became popular.
Yeah. And this is something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, that regardless of what you read, you are benefiting from reading. You're increasing your comprehension, your critical thinking skills, whether it's a self-help book, nonfiction, literary fiction, romantasy, inanimate object romance. Like, it doesn't matter what you're reading. Any reading is good reading. All reading is good reading. It's the tagline of our podcast. So I'm glad that that's getting pushed back. It's also interesting. It seems like in the last year, men have caught up to the fact that a lot of what women are reading does involve sex. And that's where some of this pushback is coming from.
And that women deriving pleasure from something or women having the freedom to pursue that is somehow
threatening.
A threat to men who subscribe to that viewpoint.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And these are the things we need to pay attention to as women.
Yeah. Well, and I was also going to say, I feel like it ties into something else that we have talked about a little bit, which is the moral panic around men.
The male loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, the male loneliness epidemic. Men aren't reading anymore. Men are being left behind. All of that is pretty clearly a reaction to women making social gains and being freer and having the freedom to choose not to date or marry someone if they don't want to, and not to have kids if they don't want to. It's pretty classic backlash stuff. Not to get too far afield from books, but it does seem like the backlash to the romantasy books and reading that women are doing was pretty in line with that.
Yeah, if you really zoom out, it's usually about more than what's right in front of you. So it never hurts to consider the bigger picture.
Yeah. The other thing that I related, it's all related, right? We talk about this all the time, that all these topics sort of loop over each other and cross over each other. But the other thing that makes me think about is that we had a couple of episodes in the past year where we've talked about this repeating moral panic around books and reading, right? Because we did that episode about, is reading a niche hobby, where we were talking about this flurry of articles that have come out about the fact that men aren't reading anymore. And we were sort of debunking that and being pretty derisive of it, I think for good reason, because there is this repeating moral panic about people not reading enough and reading being imbued with all this ethical and moral baggage. However, on the other hand, there was a study that came out several months ago, a large-scale study that is credible, that showed that over the past several decades, people read much, much less than they used to. And so both of those things can be true, right? They don't contradict one another. There does tend to be a little of moral panicky when we're talking about certain groups reading or not reading, but it is objectively a fact that people read less now than they did 40 years ago. That's just observable. And that is a problem. And I've seen a lot about that on social media as well. And that study has been making the rounds, and I'll also put it in the show notes. But one of the things that it also pointed out that I am again, in my filter bubble that I live in and talking to you about books all the time and being a librarian and being a big reader, it always shocks me, is that the vast majority of people don't even read a book a year.
Yeah, I would love to revisit this topic because we did that episode quite a while ago. So I would love to do an episode in the future about literacy and what that looks like for our future. And currently, if we can find updated studies, I think it would be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I agree. We should do a full episode on it.
Okay, so let's get to what I'm most excited to hear about, which is what are you looking forward to reading in 2026? What's on your newly culled TBR?
I'm only about halfway done with culling my TBR, but I do have some books in the hopper already that I know I want to read. I'm reading 2 of them right now. So I'm reading a book called All That Life Can Afford by Emily Everett, which was a Reese's book club pick last year. You probably would recognize it if you saw the cover. It's doing to me what Zoe and I talked about when we interviewed her last month, where you read a book that is similar to the book that you want to write or are trying to write, and it makes you want to give up writing because you're like, well, this person already did it. That's basically what's happening to me.
Oh,
with
no.
Which is to say, it's very, very good, and I love it. But it's basically about a young woman who, right out of college, goes to England and has all of these fish out of water experiences. She's a tutor for really well-to-do people who live in London, and she gets access to this rarefied world that she hasn't seen before, and it's really good. I'm enjoying it. And then on Zoe's recommendation, actually, I'm listening to A Murder for Miss Hortense by Mel Pennant, which is a cozy mystery that focuses on older Black people who live in England that are part of what is called the Windrush generation, which I think that Zoe mentioned briefly in our interview with her. This book has been really interesting because it's opening up a world that I am not familiar with, and I have learned a lot of things, and I love that. I love it when I'm reading a book and they are talking about something and I have to look it up because I've never heard of it before. I feel like that is really a good experience.
It's just another example of how reading fiction can still be beneficial.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it opens up the lives and the worlds of people that you're not familiar with, that you've never experienced, and makes you more empathetic to different people's experiences.
And can be based on
lives.
true historical fact that then you look up and learn about.
Yeah, exactly. So those both were on my TBR, and I have successfully started reading them. So I had to include those in there. I also have a couple of books that are nature related. So I know we both read The Comfort of Crows book this past year, and that made me want to read more similar books that are about nature. And so one of them is called Is a River Alive by Robert McFarlane. The premise seems a little wild, but it's this idea of rivers as living beings, which is actually a fairly ancient idea. That really captured my interest. So I have that on my shelf right now. I really want to read The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is historical fiction. Everyone who's read that book has said that it's amazing. So I really want to read that. I have a couple of romances that I want to read. One that has been on my shelf for a while that I definitely want to read this year is called Consider Yourself Kissed by Jessica Stanley. And it's described as a literary love story told through 10 years in the life of a woman as she tries to build a family without losing herself, is the way that it's described. That one I want to read because it's spanning the genres that I'm finding myself pulled between right now, right? Romance and the more literary. There is a mystery I want to read called Death at the White Hart by Chris Chibnall, who is the person who wrote the show Broadchurch. Did you ever watch Broadchurch? It has Olivia Colman in it. It's British. It's a crime mystery series. And it was so good. Oh, it also has David Tennant in it. Olivia Colman and David Tennant. It was amazing. And so that was enough for me to want to pick up this book. And then I also really want to read and actually bought this book called Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. And it's all about the women writers that Jane Austen read. So there's a bunch of women writers that were really popular in the 19th century that Jane Austen read and referenced in her works that have completely fallen out of fashion. People don't read them anymore. And so this book is about those writers, and it also has made me want to read their books. So I'm going to probably on audio, as I talked about, go back and read some of those older books. I have a bunch of books that I want to read that are going to be published this year. I feel like there are a lot of really good books coming out this year. I have a list that's probably longer than we have time for, so I'll choose just a couple, but I'm going to put all of them in the show notes. So if you're looking for books to read that are going to be published this year, then go to the show notes. There are a couple that are coming out that are about a similar thing, which is the idea of a literary focus sort of magic. So there's one that's called The Astral Library by Kate Quinn that's coming out in February, where there's a secret door in the Boston Public Library that leads to a literary magical realm.
Cool.
Where this woman can basically enter the world of books. So she can go into Sherlock Holmes's London or go into Huck Finn's Mississippi.
I wish that was real.
That type of thing. Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Right. Every reader has had that fantasy. And so I feel like that book just sounds so fun. And then the other one that is a similar literary magic idea is called The Book Witch by Meg Schaefer, which is coming out in April. And it is about a woman who is called a book witch, which is a thing in this world. So it has a little bit of a fantasy element where basically she is defending works of fiction from foes who, so it's again this idea that the world of fiction is a real world that can be tampered with or ruined by these malicious magical rogue characters. I thought that looked really cute.
Yeah, that sounds awesome too. I need to add those to mine.
Yeah. The other one that I'm really looking forward to is also coming out in April is called American Fantasy by Emma Straub. And she's written a few really big books that were New York Times bestsellers, but for whatever reason, I never was really drawn to them. But this one is about a woman who goes on a cruise, a 4-day cruise, and it features the members of a 1990s boy band as they exist today, right? So they're in their like 40s or 50s or whatever. And she ends up having a romantic connection with one of the band members that she had a crush on when she was a kid.
Amazing.
And I feel like there's something about the middle-age romantic fantasy of that just, I think, sounds like so much fun.
That sounds awesome and right up our alley. You could just insert whatever boy band you prefer in there to imagine.
Yeah, so I have a lot more than that I am looking forward to that are coming out, but I'll stop there because I could go on for another hour. What about you? What's on your TBR for the coming year?
So I guess I kind of outed myself in the beginning. These books that I'm going to share, I may or may not read them. They're what I think I want to read right now, but we'll see if I actually get around to them because my TBR, it's not law.
You're not going to hold yourself.
No, I'm not going to, but this is what is floating around in my brain right now that I currently want to read. So we'll see how many of them I get to. The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. It's having a moment right now. It was published in 2023. I think it's a popular book club book. It's a historical mystery of an 18th century midwife who investigates a shocking murder that unhinges her small community. Our cousin Ivory recommended this one to me. She said it was really good. And I generally trust Ivory's taste. Our taste in books is different, but we have some overlaps, and historical fiction is one of those. So that's on my list. The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, published in 2025. That was a lot of people's favorite read for this year. Very popular book. You read it, didn't you?
No, I want to read it. I tried to listen to it. And I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with the narrator. It just didn't work for me. If you've listened to me talk about audiobook narrators before, you know that I am super, super picky. I have very specific tastes when it comes to audiobook narrators. And then I forgot about it and didn't pick up the paper book. But now that you mention it, I definitely want to add that to my plans.
Yeah, it sounds really good. It's about a woman who tries to heal old wounds and make sense of the world in the only way she knows how, through letters. So it's epistolary, it's literary fiction, it's a debut novel. I think it has to do with generational trauma and relationships to your mom and that sort of thing. And then the next one on my list is a throwback, but it's also having a moment right now. It's called I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. It was published in 1995. It's described as a haunting, heartbreaking, post-apocalyptic tale of female friendship and intimacy set in a deserted world. 39 women are kept in isolation deep underground in a cage. Above ground, a world awaits. Originally written in French, translated by Ross Schwartz. That sounds very good.
Yikes.
Very heavy, but... like I said, my tastes have changed recently, and I'm into this type of little bit dark, little bit post-apocalyptic. I think it might be a reaction to what's happening in our world. The next one is kind of a departure from all of that. It's a nonfiction. It's called Life Form by Jenny Slate. It was published in 2024. If you don't know who Jenny Slate is, she's Mona Lisa in Parks and Rec. She's hilarious. She's a comedian, best-selling author, actor, and this one is described as a wild, soulful, hilarious collection of genre-bending essays depicting the journey of motherhood as you've never seen it before. I think her perspective on motherhood was probably fascinating, so that's on my TBR this year. I've been reading a lot of essay collections, too, which is... different. The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, another very popular one, published in 2024. It's been on the edge of my mind. I've been thinking about it, but of course then it was in the Taylor Swift documentary and everyone's reading it and I have FOMO. So this one's about a girl who goes missing from her summer camp bunk in 1975, which triggers a panic, terrified search. And she's the daughter of the wealthy family who owns the camp and the opulent estate and land surrounding it. And her brother also went missing 14 years ago, never to be found. So a little bit of a mystery element there.
I also remember Becca saying that she listened to this book and liked it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about the audiobook, so I haven't decided. I'll probably listen to it, too. It's still hardcover, and I don't love hardcover books. Another random fact about me and my reading, which is a great segue into Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, because I have not read this book yet, even though it was on my TBR for 2025, and I've read every other Emily Henry book. But I want to own all the paperbacks, and they're not publishing it in paperback yet, and my library doesn't have a copy. So I'm still waiting for the paperback version. It's about two writers who compete for the chance to tell a larger-than-life story of a woman with more than a couple of plot twists up her sleeve. So we'll see if they start publishing it in paperback, but it's probably still too popular.
I also want to read this, but haven't read it because I bought it for the library, but then I had a guilty conscience about checking it out before I put it out on the shelf and gave my library patrons a chance to check it out first. And then, of course, it got checked out immediately. Mm-hmm. But I just saw that it came back and it sat out there for a couple of days. And so I let myself check it out. So I'm going to read it this year. Good.
I haven't really looked into what books are being published this year. I'm not as much in the know with that as Liz is.
Since you don't have any for this category, allow me to tell you about some books that I think you might want to know are coming out this year.
I like this.
Because I didn't mention any of these when I was talking about my TBR, but I think that you might want to know. There's a new Abby Jimenez book coming out in March called The Night We Met. That you might want to read. There is a new Maggie O'Farrell book coming out in June called Land. And she also has other books, but just in hearing you talk about how much you love Hamnet, I thought it was possible that you might be interested in her new book. And Patchett has a new book coming out in June also called Whistler. And Leigh Bardugo, who wrote The Familiar, has a new book coming out called Deadbeat in September.
Okay. Yeah. Those all need to go on my list. So thank you, Liz. Those are great recommendations. It really pays to have a librarian in your life, folks. And then I do have a few audiobooks I'm planning on reading. I actually have already started Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares, and Sam Altman's Open AI. It's by Karen Howe, I think is how you pronounce her name. Published in 2025. Like I said, I've already started listening to this, and I know a lot of people only read one book a year, and I would say if you're only going to read one book a year, this is the one you should read. I'll just read the description. From a longtime AI insider with intimate access to the world of Sam Altman's Open AI from the beginning, an eye-opening account of arguably the most fateful tech arms race in history. It's a critical look at AI, which is very important. Generally, I find nonfiction easier to get through on audio, and I believe the author narrates the book, which is also helpful because their tone of voice helps you with the meaning behind the text and that sort of thing. And it's probably the biggest existential question right now in our society. So I think it's important that we all pay attention and don't just blindly jump on the bandwagon before we understand all the repercussions. So yes, that's my soapbox moment for this episode, one of them. And then next on my list is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This was one that Liz recommended I read because it is similar to The Which Way Tree in the fact that they're going on an epic journey chasing an animal. But like we've talked about, it's that mid-19th century language. And if I find it as tedious as I found Dracula, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through 33 hours of it.
Yeah, it's very long. Okay, I'm just going to say this to you now. And I'm saying it now so that also I can say it to all of the listeners. Moby Dick is a great book. It's fast-paced if you fast forward through all of the parts that are the very detailed, meticulous accounts of whaling. So I'm not saying that you should fast forward through those parts, but if you get to a part where you feel like, oh my God, I have been listening to this narrator talk about how to render whale blubber into fuel for lamps for like 30 minutes, you should just fast forward because it's going to go for like another hour before you get done. Like it's... Al is yelling from the background about how what I'm saying is heretical, I'm sure. What did you say? Those are the best bits.
It's all subjective, right?
You're getting a peek into my domestic harmony here. I am just saying, knowing, Martha, what you enjoy about books and what most people enjoy about books, the story of Moby Dick, the actual story, the characters interacting, them going after the whale, their interactions on the ship, all of that, I actually think is very modern in how it feels and how the pace is and how they interact with each other and talk to each other. The parts that bog people down are the whaling parts. So I'm just saying that if you start to lose it, just fast forward over the whaling parts and you will still get the story.
That makes sense. And then lastly, similar to how 2025 was the year of Robin Hobb, I kind of have a goal to make 2026 the year of Ursula Le Guin, or at least her Earthsea series. Have you heard of this, Liz?
Oh, yeah. I love Ursula K. Le Guin. I have never read the Earthsea series.
Because it's her only fantasy work. It is a series of, I think it's like 6 books written between 1968 and 2001. Fantasy novels that explore themes of identity, power, and the balance between humanity and nature. The 4th novel kind of shifts focus to the experiences of women in the Earthsea world and challenging the assumptions of authority and examining the impacts of violence and personal growth. And she has a very rich world that she built, and her portrayal of magic is intricately tied to the natural world, which sets her work apart from other fantasy authors. So I'm really intrigued to read that. I will say I had planned to listen to it but I just don't think I can get through them with the narrator. So I might have to try and do the physical copy, but it'll take me longer to get through those.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my goal for that. I love reading fantasy written by women specifically. So that's it.
Yeah. That's awesome. And Ursula K. Le Guin is amazing. She's really, really cool. Pacific Northwest author, of course. That sounds good.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what this year holds.
So are you setting reading goals for the coming year?
Yes, and I am going to set the same goal, like I already talked about, that I find attainable and gives me a lot of freedom. So that is read one physical book a month and as many audiobooks as I can manage, and try to utilize the library and Libby and or Libro FM more than I have been. What about you? Big sigh.
Well, I mean, yes, of course I am going to have a goal. I think what I'm struggling with is my compulsion to make my goal higher. But I'm not going to do that because this conversation has reminded me of what we talked about at our last year-end episode and how it was such a relief to me to not have this unattainable reading goal hanging over my head. If I have this goal that I've set myself that no one's holding me to, but hanging over my head, I still feel guilty all the time for how I'm spending my time. So I'm not going to do that. I read 38 books this year, and so maybe we'll set it like one or two higher than that. Maybe 40. 40 is a good round number. So it's still totally achievable because you also have to remember, I have to remember, that one of the books I read this year was The Woman in White. And I listened to it, but I spent at least a month listening to that one book, if not longer, actually. And so I could get through 2 or 3 normal length books in the time that I did that. So that still feels very achievable to me, but technically is higher than this year.
And, you know, we've talked about this before in other episodes. You only have so much time. And sure, you could read more books, but that would probably mean you weren't writing as much. You weren't working on your novels. So I'm going to say if you only read 38 books, which is a great amount of books and more than most people read, that means you're still writing, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I would say to you all day long. So it's a good reminder for me to give myself a break the same way that I encourage other people to give themselves a break.
Absolutely. We're our own worst critics, aren't we?
Yeah.
Well, where can people find the show notes for these lists of books and research articles that we've talked about?
Oh, yeah. The show notes are linked to on our website, which is allbooksaloudpod.com.
Perfect.
And so once you go to that URL, there is a link up in the navigation at the very top that's called Show Notes and Transcripts.
Wonderful. Well, if you want even more bookish content, make sure you're following us on Instagram and TikTok at allbooksaloudpod. Make sure that you subscribe because we're not publishing episodes regularly anymore, just as we have the desire and capacity in our normal lives to put episodes out. So make sure you subscribe, leave us a rating and review. It really helps people find us, and share this with someone who you think would enjoy listening to it, because that's also the biggest way that we can increase our reach. We really appreciate it. And as always, read on, my friends.